Welcome to the June 14th, 2021 class of Oracle. I'm Ray Smith, and I'm glad to have you here. We'll have just a few more joining us, and I'll let them in as they come online. So we are at still more stories from the Secret City, and we'll be going through several stories today. Probably the most important thing to remember is that I really do want your questions. That makes it much more enjoyable for me, and I think you'll get more out of it as well. I need to see why. We still have others coming, so let me go slow here at the beginning and get as many folks in as we can. Well, that has to be there. All right, that's enough. And I will remind you that we are using Zoom video conferencing, so keep yourself muted, except when you want to speak. And use the speaker view to see it still be small, but a large image of the person speaking. And gallery view will let you see all participants. You'll have to scroll through to get them. And use chat to enter questions, either to everybody or to me privately. And an alternate method, of course, is to just speak up and ask your questions. And I sincerely and really do not mind being interrupted. That's good. And if you send me a chat, remind me that you've done that, just to be sure that we don't miss a question. Just a very brief little bit about me. I was born in Middle Tennessee, a little crossroads community called Delina. I've written a book about Delina. It's a bestseller. All 25 people that live there have bought copies of it. I married Fanny, my high school sweetheart. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I've been in Oak Ridge for 50 years. Historian for the Y-12 National Security Complex until I retired in 2017. I'm a historian for the city of Oak Ridge since 2015. Been an elder at Highland View since 1988, and a chaplain with the police department since 1999. Now, I'm going to begin with a short video. This little video is made by Carolyn Nadelin. She's a high school student, and she had taken on the assignment to do a documentary film about Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And she called me up and we did a Zoom session and recorded some information that she could use. And what we recorded were some of the stories that I tell everyone who comes to Oak Ridge. Now, some of you will have heard these stories, I'm sure, but just enjoy listening to them once again, and realize that this young lady got an A+ for doing this. So it turned out to be a good product for her. Now, I need some help as I begin. I need someone to tell me if you can hear the sound and if you can see the video. Now, let me stop this share. I have to make some changes when I put video on. And I need to go here. And then I share the screen. I share the sound and I optimize for video. And share again. And I hope that makes it large. And please, someone, just the first one who can get unmuted and say it, tell me if you're hearing sound And if you're seeing video, please say both of those things for me. Let's try it.
I am hearing it and seeing it.
Thank you for letting me know you can see it and hear it. I realize it's a little sketchy, but just hang in there.
You can hear and see.
Thank you. Roosevelt knew it would be an expensive undertaking, so he put General Groves in charge of the Manhattan Project. Groves had just finished building the Pentagon, so he knew how to put a large construction project together. He knew how to get private industry involved, and he knew how to spend money. So President Roosevelt also called in Senator McKellar. And he said, Senator, I need to put a large amount of money against the war effort, and I can't let the press or anyone know how much it is or what it's being used for. Can you help me with that? Senator McKellar said, yes, Mr. President, I can do that for you. Just where in Tennessee are you going to put that thing? Didn't have automobiles. They didn't have trucks to move their belongings. They had a car. They might not be able to buy gas for it or tires. Those things were rationed. But what they did have is young men in the military getting killed. So they wanted to do anything they could to end that war and stop that killing. So they got off their property, many of them in a matter of days, in order to make room for the Manhattan Project. And first plant started was the Y12 plant, and it was built to separate the uranium 235 from the natural uranium because that isotope is what was needed for an atomic bomb. Once that started, the next thing he did was to start the graphite reactor, also in February. And that reactor was at the X10 location, which is now the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And the reason for it was to prove that you could produce plutonium in a uranium reactor. Now, plutonium is the other material, along with uranium 235, that can be used to make an atomic bomb. But plutonium doesn't exist in nature hardly at all. So they had to produce it, had to grow it, if you will, out of that uranium reactor. And they also started the K25 gaseous diffusion plant. Now, it was a method to enrich the uranium, that same kind of thing that was happening at Y12, only the Y12 was a batch process. It took 1,152 of the machines called calutrons, stands for California University cyclotrons, and 22,482 people. And they worked for nearly a year just to get enough material, that uranium 235 for little boy, and a little left over. So the gaseous diffusion process is a continuous operation. You pump that uranium hexafluoride through a barrier material, and you do it about 3,000 times, just running it through separate stages. And the building, the K25 building, was a mile long, a U-shaped, half mile in each of the wings. But it was built to be a more economical process, but they didn't get it started in time until about March of 1945. It began to contribute to the Y-12 process. So Oak Ridge was built to generate the uranium-235 needed for an atomic bomb.
Surgeon at the University of Minnesota. And he was working as a staff surgeon there. And apparently in the maybe 5 or 6 years before, he had somehow joined the medical reserve corps. So he was, on the Army's radar somehow. And he wasn't in the service at that point. He was operating and doing his job at the U. And he found out from friends that people were saying, have you done something wrong? The FBI has been talking to us about you. We just wanted you to know that. And he's like, I didn't do anything. So he went about his way. And then he was thinking of signing up to join the service. And he made inquiries and they said they lost his records. They didn't have anything on him. So he was like, well, that's weird. And then he gets a call to come to his boss's office, and he goes there, and he was taken away on an airplane, flown to Chicago, where he met with General Leslie Groves, who was the head of the Manhattan Project. And General Groves interviewed him and said he was being considered for some top secret base where they needed to start a hospital. They were going to start a city. And he said, I'm a surgeon. I'm not a hospital administrator. I can't imagine why you'd want me. And General Groves said, we want you. And he said, can you tell me what it's about? And he said, no. He was allowed to take his wife, my mom, and my 3 older siblings, who were 3, 2, and a baby at the time. And they all went to Oak Ridge. When they got there, there was really nothing. There were Quonset huts and trailers for people to live in. And over the time they were there, it turned into a bustling city. It was quite amazing how they went to work and did it. He, ran the hospital. When he left Minnesota, he had to start a hospital from scratch. So they needed obstetricians, they needed surgeons, they needed psychiatrists, they needed neurologists, they needed the whole gamut of medical specialties. So he took one of each from the University of Minnesota. Luckily, he had his boss's permission to do that. But it was a big drain off of, a lot of the talent from University of Minnesota just left for the duration of the war. According to him, he was the hospital administrator, but things never really quite added up because he did have a high security clearance. He did travel to Washington. He used to talk about going to Washington with a briefcase handcuffed to his arm. So, he obviously knew secrets that he was never, ever going to disclose. The whole story about what was going on there, but they really weren't sure. They had no idea really what they were dealing with. And so they were worried about radiation, contamination, how to deal with if there were accidents at the plant. So he had to know essentially what they were doing. And he also knew that they were making a bomb.
General Groves believed in compartmentalizing the activities. So he would put anyone who had responsibility in a certain building could go into that building, but they couldn't go into any other building. So he kept the people only knowing what they needed to know to do their job. You were not allowed to talk about the project. You couldn't talk to your family about it. You couldn't talk to other workers about it. You could only do your job and work in that area. After the war ended, they formed a club and they called it the 43 Club. And it was for anybody who was there in 1943. At the end of the meeting, the man held his hand up and said, "I'd like to ask a question." They said, "Okay, what is it?" He said, "I had to do something and I want to see if anybody else did. I had to keep a stack of 3x5, blank 3x5 cards in my pocket. And if I heard anybody talking about the project, I had to write down what I heard, who said it, and where it was. And I had to put it in an envelope and send it to the Acme Finance Company. Now, if I didn't hear anything at the end of the week on Friday, I had to send in a blank card." Now, I wonder, did anybody else have to do that? About half the people in the room held their hand up. Well, sorry about that. Now, did you you had to listen to some of the stories that some of you'd heard before from me, but had you ever heard about Dr. Ray and how he got to be here in Oak Ridge? I'm sure you didn't. He actually started the hospital here in Oak Ridge and was a key part of the program here. So it was good to get that story. That young lady, at best, is a junior high. I believe she was even younger than that, but she's done an outstanding job putting that program together. And thank you all for letting me know that you could hear and see the program or the presentation. Any questions about that little segment? Who is her
You
father?
had to be quite a fast reader to read the text. It disappeared
Yes.
rather quickly.
Yeah, it did. I noted that she didn't leave it up long enough for you to get all of her text. But her father was Colonel Ray. Thank you all for that exchange in the chat. Any other questions? All right, I want to move on to a little different segment here. This one, I want to give you
the first that I'd heard about the people carrying the cards in their pocket and turning them
oh,
at the end of the week. I'd never heard that part of the story before, which I found very interesting.
yes, I did. When I learned that, I found that was interesting too. And I found that more people than not seem to be involved in that, carrying cards and reporting on anything that they heard. At least several people were doing that. So that was an interesting aspect to learn. All right, the next segment, I'm going to introduce a local doctor, Dr. Jim Michael, and he will tell you about his experience here in bringing a friend to Oak Ridge. And let me see if I can get it set up. No, I was afraid of that. Wait just a moment. I've got to get this back up. Now, optimize for sound clip. Okay, let's share it. And let's go back to, that's the wrong one. Go to, I didn't mean to do that. All right. Bring it up. It's rolling.
My name is Jim Michael, and a couple weeks ago I had a college friend of mine from Minnesota come down to visit me for 3 or 4 days. And I wanted to show him Oak Ridge and East Tennessee because he'd never been in this area before. So I got on the website Explore Oak Ridge, which I had never been on before, to see what my own city and area had to offer. And one of the things that came up was the fact that we now have a National Historic Park here, and it has lots of features. So we went on the National Park bus tour, in which we visited the American Museum of Science and Energy. This is the first time that I'd visited the new museum myself. My friend was super impressed with that museum. We went on to see the Manhattan Project exhibit at the Children's Museum, and he was fascinated to learn about the history of the Manhattan Project, which he knew only in name only before that. And then the tour also took us to the History Museum at the old Wildcat Den, and that was interesting too. My friend told me he went back to Minnesota and told everybody about his experiences here in Oak Ridge because they made such a big impression on him, and I was very happy to hear his response to all of that.
Okay, now let me show you the next one. This will be Alan Lowe, who will be talking to us about the AMSI, American Museum of Science and Energy, and the K-25 History Center, and the AMSI Foundation. Now, let me tell you, Alan's going to be our guest on the third program that we have, but this is an introduction to the present situation with our museums. The Jim Michael interview was before the COVID pandemic, and it also spoke about, excuse me, spoke about a tour that was a trial tour that we put together and hope to bring back again now that the pandemic is pretty much behind us. And also we hope to bring back the DOE public tours that goes out to the 3 sites as well. But that was a local in the city tour that he participated in. And I think we're going to get all of those going again. We just have to realize that getting through the pandemic has changed our lives considerably, but we want to get back to normal as soon as we can. So here's Alan Lowe.
My name is Alan Lowe, and I serve as the director of the American Museum of Science and Energy and the K-25 History Center in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Today is a big day in the history of our museums. On March 1st, 2021, we have now transitioned to day-to-day operations being overseen by our private AMSI Foundation. It's a big day, and it's been a long time coming. The foundation is made up of wonderful folks here in the local area, headed by Jim Campbell, all dedicated to making these museums all they can be. We're proud of their history, but we know their future's even better. We're also very happy with the tradition of service that DOE has had here. They've been a longtime supporter of AMSI and of K-25. They continue that support now, but in a different way under what's called a cooperative agreement. Starting today, AMSI Foundation will run these wonderful, wonderful museums. Our mission is to tell the story of the Manhattan Project, to tell the story of Oak Ridge National Lab, and all the things that happened here since the Manhattan Project, the amazing advances in science and engineering, and to then use that as a foundation to teach lessons of STEAM and STEM and history to this and future generations. I'm really proud of our staff here, of what we do, and our mission. And now that mission is going forward under the AMSI Foundation with continued support from our terrific DOE partners. We need all of you to help us as well. Please consider buying memberships to our museum. Go to our online gift shop. When we reopen, please come and visit us and see our exhibits. We are still closed to the public as of March 1st right now, but we hope to open later this year. In the meantime, we've been staying really busy. Go on to amsi.org and you'll see a lot of things we've been putting up online. Our educators, for example, have been extraordinarily busy working with our director of marketing to put together a whole range of online educational resources that are being used all over the world. We've been doing virtual education in classrooms. We've been developing educational materials. So our educators, our staff here, they've stayed really busy. We've been doing other things online as well. AMSIcast is now online. It's our podcast. I think we have 5 episodes up as of today. More are coming. Wonderful interviews with a range of scientists, engineers, historians, policymakers, Oak Ridge National Lab, leadership, all these folks on AMSIcast you can find on any major podcast channel. We also have online the AMSI Book Club, a virtual book club where once a month we'll be focusing on a really great book, commenting back and forth online, and then having a Zoom broadcast at the end of every month. We've also taken this time to renovate exhibits and put in some new ones so that when we do open, they're going to be even better. So for example, we have a new virtual reality gallery that's been put in. We've put in a new case devoted to the nuclear navy, and there's a whole lot more in our exhibits. So please do consider visiting our online gift shop, the Discovery Shop at AMSI. We're selling a range of fun educational materials. Please check that out. And remember, this is your museum. We want you to come in here. We want you to be part of this. I'm excited about the new day here at AMSI, and I invite you to be part of it. Thank you so much.
Now, the AMSI Museum has opened. It opened the latter part of May. So it is open, and the K-25 History Center is open. The Children's Museum is open now on a full schedule. And the Oak Ridge History Museum opened the first week in June, so just last week. So all of our museums, except for the Y-12 History Center, are back open to the public now. So I would encourage you to keep that in mind when you have visitors coming. This next video is one that talks about the future for the K-25 history area. The museum is already there. It opened last week in February in 2020. pardon me, then closed 2 weeks later because of the pandemic. So it's only been open to the public a very short time, and now it is open again. So I encourage you to take full advantage of that History Center. And this is going to talk about the bigger anticipated completion of the projects at the K-25 History Center.
In 2012, DOE's Oak Ridge Office of Environmental Management committed to construct the K-25 History Center, equipment building, and viewing tower to preserve and share the amazing story behind the men and women who built and operated the former K-25 site. Construction is currently underway on the K-25 History Center, and it will open to the public in fall 2019. DOE also anticipates opening the equipment building and viewing tower in 2021. These facilities are adjacent to the original footprint of K-25, which is now part of the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. The three-story equipment building will replicate a unit of the K-25 building. It highlights the technological accomplishments in the facility that led to our nation's ability to produce highly enriched uranium through gaseous diffusion. The viewing tower will stand 70 feet tall for visitors to see and experience the magnitude of the entire K-25 footprint. Visitors will also have a 360-degree view of the entire site to help understand the scale of the Manhattan and Cold War era site.
So I realize that video is dated. The History Center, K-25 History Center, actually opened, as I mentioned, the second week or the last week in February of 2020. And the equipment building is not yet constructed. It is at the point now of being, if the design is finished and the construction can start possibly later this year. That and the viewing tower is to be included. I don't think it's going to be 70 feet tall. I think it's going to be lower, but I do think that we'll have the ability to see the footprint. And one of the things that was not mentioned in the video that has been decided is that they're going to mark that footprint so that it'll be obvious the size of the building, and I think it'll be a good viewing experience for the visitor to come to the K-25 site. So my intent there was to try and bring you up to speed on not only the things that are happening in the museums, and that the museums are open, but also that the plans for K-25 are continuing to evolve, and we would hope to see some construction out there before too long that'll finish the national park footprint there at the K-25 site. Any questions you have that any of this is brought up on your mind up until what we've done to now? Just unmute yourself, or either I'm watching the chat. You can put something in the chat as well, and ask any questions that you'd want.
Yes. Is Jim Michael the same as the cardiologist in Oak Ridge?
Yes, sir, he is. He's retired now, but and he's active with the free medical clinic. But you're correct. That's Jim. Is the K-25 Overlook still open? Yes, it is open. It just reopened within the last 2 weeks, and it has been upgraded. There's been significant changes to that. There's a video that runs in there. It's been enlarged, and there's a really good display, especially about the wheat area and about Happy Valley. You can see that in there. And yes, the K-25 Overlook is open daily, and I would encourage you to utilize that. It's now in private hands. That whole area has been purchased, and I believe his name is Murdoch. I'm not sure I can remember exactly, but it is a privately owned facility, and he really wants the visitors to come by, and has put a good bit of his own money into redoing that, expanding it with the help, not monetarily, but with the guidance and support from Nikki Nicholas at the National Park. She's helped him to create the displays and to make it just a really good overlook. So I would encourage you to do that. And I promise that next class, I'll have some photographs of that overlook. I should have put them in today, and I apologize for that. But it has been upgraded. It is open, and please stop by there. Thanks, Sandy. Any others? Yes. Bob, you have a question? I'm going to mute you. Anyone else have a question?
Why was the reactor chosen to be built in Oak Ridge? The X10 reactor.
Actually, at the time, thank you. That's a good question. At the time they decided to build that reactor, the thought process was that they were going to include everything in Oak Ridge. They had not decided on the Hanford, Washington location. But in the process of putting, and remember, it wasn't that long since the first piles, the uranium pile in Chicago, and they wanted to prove that that principle could work. And they knew they needed plutonium. And they thought they would put it all here in Oak Ridge. But once they started building that reactor, and they realized that they were not going to just need one, but we're going to need more if they hope to produce that plutonium in any reasonable amount of time. And they also realized that the land space here and the proximity to Knoxville did not lend itself to putting everything here. They had already committed for the K-25 and Y-12 to go here, and the graphite reactor. It turned into what they called a semi-works. It was a proof of principle. And the decision was made to locate the three larger reactors out at Hanford. So the reason for the decision to locate it here was the thought process that we were going to put everything, they were going to put everything here. But that quickly changed when they realized the magnitude of what they were going to have to do, and the desire, not only that they not have it close to any large population area, but also that they're going to need a huge amount of water, as they realized that the air-cooled reactor, the graphite reactor, they needed to change that design and make it water-cooled. So that Columbia River, the area in the Washington around the Hanford site, was very attractive to them. And remember, that's over 560 square miles. It's a huge, huge area that was taken out there for those reactors. And that was what they did. They built 3 during the Manhattan Project, and then they built more after, during the Cold War. So they had that whole area up there full of the reactors. Thanks for that question. Are there others? All right. The next thing I want to show you is an animation that I've just gotten from Y-12. We created this animation of how a Calutron works. We created it back in 2017, right before I retired. And it has not been used until now. And I brought it out primarily for a course that I'm helping with, an ORICL course on mass spectrometry. And I wanted a way to show how the Calutron operated. And we created this little animation. It's just very short, but it does demonstrate how the ions, the uranium chloride ions, are in a charge box in between a magnetic field, and how they come out, and when they come out are attracted out electrically, how they make an arc and how they separate. And I think this visually does that better than anything that I've seen. So I'd like to just share it with you, and then we'll talk about it a bit too. So let's see if I can get it up. And share. That aggravating thing. All right. Play. Uh-oh, I'm sorry. Stop the share. Get rid of that. Okay, let's try that once more. Let's see if I can remove this part, close that out. Close that out, because I don't think we need it. All right, now let's try it one more time. There's no sound associated with it, but as you can see, the ions are coming out in two streams down at the charge box, and those streams actually cross and then go into the receiving boxes through those slits. And the highly enriched uranium, or the uranium-235 really, comes in at the bottom of the slot. The red dots represent the U-235 and the blue dots represent the uranium-238. So I think that's as good an image as I've been able to create that demonstrates how Calutron worked. Now, let me ask you a question. I think I have showed this video before. This is a tour of Beta 3. It's a virtual tour. And I think if you would like to see it, I'd like to run it for you. I've got one of Beta 3 and of 9731, both two of the buildings at Y12 that are in the Manhattan Project National Historical Park. And that eventually, I hope we'll have the 9731 available maybe this year, but Beta 3 is going to be longer. So this will be a view inside Beta 3. So Beta 3 is one of the 9 large buildings that were used to house the Calutron. The Calutrons were located in the high bay. So these are the Calutrons. Let me show you a little closer view. And notice the red line. That was to tell you if you had any metal in your pocket, you shouldn't get any closer than that because it might pull you right up against those large magnets. Remember, it's a batch process, so you've got one here, and the material goes into the bottom and comes out at the top. Now, it was one large racetrack of 36 Calutrons during the Manhattan Project when they were separating uranium. But then after the war, when they started separating those stable isotopes, they didn't need all of that large racetrack. They needed smaller ones. So they put in shunts here. So now they have 4 smaller racetracks that they can use to separate different elements in each of the racetracks. And they did that until 1998, separating all of the elements in the periodic table here at these Calutrons. The Calutrons were used during the war to separate the uranium for little boy. But after the war, they would separate all of the elements in the periodic table. Some of them they would send over to the graphite reactor and make them radioactive. And something that started being separated in the Calutron through another process would eventually produce cardiac scan medical isotopes. So the exact same science, the exact same equipment that produced the uranium for little boy also produced these isotopes, stable isotopes, that were used as targets to produce nuclear medicine. So let me demonstrate how these Calutron works. If you look here, the first thing you have is you heat up that material that's in the charge box, and then it's attracted out between those 2 magnets. And the magnets cause it to bend, and you get that arc that causes the material to separate by its mass and go into the collector up at the top. This is the control room where the young girls would have operated those Calutrons. Actually, this one right here is Gladys Owens, and this is her picture when she came back later. She worked here from January till December of 1945, sitting on these stools, operating these cubicles, and separating that uranium. Now let's walk right down here. And remember, they were adjusting these knobs and watching these meters on each of these, one of the Calutron girls at each location.
What was the stick used
The stick, thank you, that's a good question. This is a grounding rod for when the maintenance people had to go in there and work on it. They'd go in and short out the high voltage capacitors before they actually went in and worked. So let me show you this plaque that was awarded to this building in recognition of its historical significance. The American Nuclear Society awarded it as a nuclear historic landmark in November of 2002. Now this is building 9731. So these are the alpha units. Notice how large they are, much taller than the betas. This building, 9731, the pilot facility for the electromagnetic separation process. This was the first building completed on the site in 1943. The other buildings were being built, and as they were being built, they actually operated these calutrons in this building. They started with this pilot facility, working out the kinks, and as they were developing the process, they were installing the other calutrons. The word calutron stands for California University Cyclotron, and it was invented by Ernest Lawrence. There were 1,152 of them here in Y12. So these are the alpha calutrons. No moving parts, just two large magnets, and that magnetic field separates uranium-235 and 238. Centrifugal force will cause that 238, which has 3 neutrons more than the 235, to make a slightly larger arc than the 235. So you can catch that 235 up at the top of the arc. There are 2 stages. There are alpha stages, that's the first stage, and then there were beta stages, the second stage. In 1,000 pounds of uranium ore, there's only 7 pounds of uranium-235. The first part of the process is the most difficult, just getting that slight amount of uranium-235 to be a larger percentage of the output product. And they operated these? After the war ended, they shut the calutrons down, except for those in this building, 9731, and over in Beta 3. Those calutrons operated until 1998, separating all of the elements in the periodic table that have stable isotopes. And some of those isotopes they were able to use by putting them into the graphite reactor to produce nuclear medicine, and other radioisotopes that were used in industry and research. The nuclear age that was introduced as a part of the Manhattan Project has resulted in nuclear power, has resulted in nuclear medicine, and tremendous technological advances that we take for granted. Even something as simple as the touch screen on your iPhone. That's origin was here in Oak Ridge. Many other examples of technological advances have come forth from the Manhattan Project.
Were there any uranium losses during the process?
Any uranium losses during the
Yeah.
process? Is that what you said, you?
Was
Well,
there a criticality concern that will happen? Could
No,
happen?
no, there was not. That material was such a precious commodity that they would not even allow it to be hand carried across the street. They would put it in a vehicle, an automobile, and move it from one place to the other. When it was being transported out to Los Alamos, it was put in small gold line, so it would be inert, gold line coffee cup size containers, put in a briefcase, strapped to an Army lieutenant's arm, put him on a passenger train up through Chicago, where another Army lieutenant met him, and they swapped the briefcase, and he went out to Lamy, New Mexico, where the train stopped, and they put it in a vehicle and took him up to Los Alamos. Now, that material was so precious and they monitored it so closely that they made sure that there weren't losses associated with that uranium. Bill Wilcox, who was our historian prior to me until he passed away, and he was technical director for both K-25 and Y-12 at one time. But when he came here and was first hired at Y-12, he was a chemist right out of college, his first job. He wanted to do war work, so they sent him to Oak Ridge. And one of the first assignments he had was to prepare the very first shipment that went from Y-12, Oak Ridge, to Los Alamos, a very small quantity of uranium-235. Now, he needed to put that in a container, and he needed to heat it and let it cool as a part of his process. So he set it up in an oven, and he put it in a small glass container that the lip of the top of that glass would just fit down into a metal can, and it would hold it. Okay, you see what I'm talking about? It would set the rim of the funnel shape, would hold it in that metal can. So he put all of that in the oven, set his timer for the oven to run the amount of time he wanted it to, and then he went home. And he came back in the next day, and when he did, his supervisor met him as he was coming in the building, and he said, "You need to go hide because the big boss is looking for you, and he is mad as a hornet." Well, Bill said, "What in the world's going on?" He said, "Come to find out that when that heated up, that material heated up, it broke that glass. And when the glass broke, that material went down into that can with the glass. And then they had to reprocess it and clean that glass out and get that uranium back." And Bill said that was the closest he ever come to getting fired. But he actually processed that first shipment that went out to Los Alamos in January of 1944. But no, they would not lose any of that material. It was so precious. Other questions? Well, I've shared information with you about our museums. I've shared information about the what's going on at the K-25 site. We talked about the security and the little cards that people kept. And we've talked about the change that has taken place with the American Museum of Science and Energy, the foundation that has been in existence for a number of years and supporting the museum by providing funding for things that the Department of Energy could not fund, and also doing other things to support the museum, such as bringing the flat top that we now have up at the Children's Museum as a part of the Manhattan Project National Historical Park exhibit up there. That's something the foundation brought back to Oak Ridge and had it down at the earlier site for the museum. But when the museum moved over to its present location, we just didn't have room for it. So we moved it up to the Children's Museum, where it has been and is continuing to be utilized up there. And by the way, I have a friend, Ray Garrett, who is going to build a replica of the Huttmans, and he's going to put that right up beside the flat top up at the Children's Museum. And by the way, the replica of the Huttmans that's inside the K-25 History Center is where he got his idea. It also has a stove, a coal burning stove that's been replicated in that exhibit. And I've connected Ray with the person who made that exhibit, and he's going to provide one for the Huttman that Ray's building up at the Children's Museum. I'm about to change directions unless you have another question. Okay, what are the admission prices? Thank you, Bob. Let me get the chat up here. What are the admission prices for the museums? $8 a person to get into the American Museum of Science and Energy. If you're a group, I think it's $5 a person. And at the Oak Ridge History Museum, the cost is $5 a person. If you're a part of a group, it's $3 a person. And then there's no extra charge for the K-25 History Center. Your AMSI gets you in there as well. And then the exhibit up at the Children's Museum, I believe that's $8 too. It may be more, I'm not sure. But you can go into the history or to the Manhattan Project National Historical Park to their reception area in the main lobby without any cost. But okay. Other questions? The museums, I should mention this, the museums, I said the Children's Museum's now open daily, I believe, as is the American Museum of Science and Energy. It opens at 9 in the morning. However, the Oak Ridge History Museum is open from 10 to 2 on Thursday and Friday, and then from 10 to 3 on Saturday. So it's open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. However, if you have people come into town and you would like a tour through that museum, if you'll contact me, I can get us in at any time, and we can have a tour, a personal tour there. And I've done that for families, and I most recently had a group from Huntsville, Alabama that came up, and they came up on a day when the museum was closed, but I was able to get the committee to agree for me to open the museum and take the 25 of them through. So we can accommodate about any time that you'd like to have a tour. Is there a need for volunteers at the museum, History Center, future tours? Absolutely. And Alan Lowe would really be upset at me if I didn't tell you just how badly the volunteers are needed. Obviously, the COVID situation changed us for a year or more, and volunteers were not as involved. Now that we've opened the museum back up, we are short on volunteers. And the same thing holds for the Oak Ridge Heritage and Preservation Association, for the Oak Ridge History Museum. Volunteers are needed there. That museum is totally volunteer operated. And they need at least 2 people there anytime the museum is open. And they can quickly train you for the what you need to know to do to let people come into the museum and show them around. There's been several improvements made to the museum during the pandemic. They were able to get an $80,000 grant from the state of Tennessee, and they put in a new lighting system, a security system, and put in a number of new cabinets for artifacts and for exhibits. So the museum has been upgraded substantially, but it does require volunteers to run the museum. So if you're interested in volunteering there, just contact anyone. That Mick Wiest is the executive director, and he would be happy to help you get connected. Emily Honeycutt is the chair of the committee for the museum. And I'll help you get in touch with anyone that you want to volunteer for, either for AMSI or for the Oak Ridge History Museum. And the National Park, Manhattan Project National Historical Park, uses volunteers to staff their visitor center there in the Children's Museum. So they can use volunteers as well. So thank you very much for that question. The need for volunteers is substantial. Any other questions? We've got about 4 minutes left. Let me tell you what's going to be happening over the next couple of classes. We'll have them each Monday morning for the next 2 weeks. And next week, I'm going to have a guest with me, Steve Oliphant. Steve grew up in Oak Ridge, and he has started the Oak Ridge hiking, or the Secret City Hiking Club. And he has made patches for all of the hikes on the greenways here in Oak Ridge. He routinely leads hikes through these greenways during the spring and fall and summer. But the thing that he brings that I think you will enjoy so much is he brings an abundance of historical knowledge about the places where those greenways pass by, or things that are associated with them, either the view from the North Ridge Trail. He loves to talk about the Cumberland Mountains, and he can point out those mountains. He has one story about the Pinnacle, which is one of the peaks that you will be delighted to hear. I'll give you just a little hint while of the time we have left of what he's going to talk about. He says, announcing our newest patch, the Emory Valley Greenway. Says it's based on the photography of Linda Spangler. She's one of the members of the hiking club. It may be ready for our group hike in a couple of weeks. This is the most historic spot in Oak Ridge, dating to 1787 as the first public road in the area, the Emory Road. Now, if you know anything about me, you'll know that I'm interested in and have documented that Emory Road passage through Oak Ridge. I worked with a young Boy Scout on an Eagle project to get the sign, the historical marker that's placed near the Midtown Community Center, right by that rock pillar bridge that was placed on the Emory Road. He goes on to say this early trail to Nashville crossed the Clinch River at today's Oak Ridge Marina. It was called Lee's Ferry at the time. And then followed the Emory Valley Road to downtown Oak Ridge, and by today's Kroger's to first cross the Emory River at Clack's Gap near K25, and then later routed through Winter's Gap at what is now present-day Oliver Springs. The spot dates to hundreds of years before that was a Native American and large wildlife crossing. The patch features the mountain on the Cumberland Escarpment called the Pinnacle, spelled with one N on the topo map. It's located 3 miles directly above Frost Bottom, Tennessee. The backstory of the Pinnacle is covered by Augusta Grove Bell in her marvelous book, Circling Windrock Mountain. I have a copy of that book, and it is a really good book. In 1829, early Frost Bottom settler William Smith moved to Frost Bottom, and that's my alarm saying we've got to stop. I'm going to finish this. So from Mount Sterling, North Carolina, when he would get homesick for the taller mountains, he would climb the Pinnacle and view his home, from his home, the tall mountain, 60 miles to the southeast, that had no name, today's Smoky Mountains. Now, he would see that from the Pinnacle. And he said after about 3 years and 20 climbs to the Pinnacle, he decided Frost Bottom was actually a little Garden of Eden in the Cumberlands, and stayed. Deer grazed in the front yard while an endless parade of raccoons, otters, and mink would stroll by in the early 1800s. The Pinnacle is a mountain older than the Smokies, at least by name. He knows it's not. The Smokies are the oldest mountain range in the nation. And of course, the fact that the Pinnacle was named before the Smokies is what he's referring to. You will enjoy the stories that Steve Oliphant will bring to us next week. And then on the third week, we'll have Alan Lowe, who will bring us more information about the American Museum of Science and Energy. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I look forward to our discussion next week and the week after. Remember, bring your questions. I really want your questions. Okay?
Thank you,
Thank you
Ray.
so much, Ray.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
See you next week.
All right.
Uh-huh.